And through the drifts the snowy cliffs did send a dismal sheen, nor shapes of men nor beasts we ken, the ice was all between.
Stratters, it's time to talk about the London Mulligan. It's a good day to do it because it looks like the price of Serum Powder is plateaued. So right now, Serum Powder is at $10 in paper, and it's at 4 tickets on Magic Online. So how did this happen? Well, there was this article on February 21st that talks about the London Mulligan happening April 26th to 28th on the second Mythic Championship. Magic the Gathering doesn't use the term Grand Prix and Pro Tours anymore. They now use the words Magic Fest for Grand Prix and Mythic Championship for Pro Tours. So this is the second Pro Tour coming April 26th to 28th. It's a new Mulligan rule. To review the history of Mulligan rules, the Mulligan rule I used when I first started Magic the Gathering was the one that Richard Garfield intended. You start out with 7 cards. If you have 0 to 7 lands in your 7 cards, you get to reveal your hand, and just to prove that it has 0 lands or 7 lands. And you shuffle it into your library, and you draw a new 7, and you have to keep that. You can't mulligan more than once. It made for really rare games where you would have 0 lands, and you mulligan, and you have 0 lands again, and you would just watch your opponent play Magic the Gathering. It was pretty miserable. Thankfully, back in the early days, it wasn't that bad because there was strip mines. You could put like 4 strip mines in your deck. It's actually made pretty fun games in Chandelar, which used 4th edition rules. You could put in 4 strip mines, and so you would never get 0 land hands. You would always, you could have maybe a strip mine hand. That was pretty rare. So you could at least like make a land drop just to strip mine your opponent, and you'd keep making your land drops that way. Once strip mine got restricted and wastelands weren't really used anymore because of Type 2, that mulligan rule was pretty rough. So Magic the Gathering came out with a Paris mulligan, and that was a test in Paris that worked. And you start out with 7 cards, you mulligan for any reason at all. It doesn't have to have 0 lands, it doesn't have to have 7 lands. It can be 1 land, 2 lands, 3 lands, 4 lands, 5 lands, 6 lands. Just mulligan your hand, any reason. And you would get 1 fewer card when you mulliganed. And you could mulligan all the way down to 0 cards. You should mulligan from 7 down to 6 or 5 and 4 and keep at 4. Or some people even say you can keep at 3. People in Magic the Gathering Online mulligan to 0 and then forfeit the game. I don't understand that. I think you should at least mulligan down to 1 and forfeit the game. It's pretty comical. Then came Theros with Scry. Scry was an amazing mechanic on 10 dual lands, tapped dual lands. And when it came into play, you get to Scry 1, which means you get to look at a card in the top of your library. You don't show it to your opponent. Only you get to see it. And you can put it on the top of your library, or you can put it on the bottom of your library. Your choice. And the Paris Mulligan was updated to be the Vancouver Mulligan. So basically, you would draw 7 cards at the beginning of your turn. If you didn't like it for any reason at all, you'd go down to 6 cards, and then you would scry 1. Look at the top card of your library. Maybe it could be a land, and you just put it on top, and you don't get mana screwed anymore. Or if maybe you need land, and you look at the top card of your library. Oh, it's a non-land. Well, I really needed land because I didn't get enough land after I mulliganed the first time. So you can put a non-land on the bottom. It really helped smooth out the games. It made for fewer miserable games in Magic the Gathering. And now we have the London Mulligan test. The London Mulligan test is not like Paris. It's not like Vancouver Mulligans. It's basically you start out with 7 cards. If you don't like that, you mulligan. You draw 7, just like Richard Garfield intended. Except now you take one of those 7 cards and you put it on the bottom of your library. And if you mulligan again, you can mulligan and draw 7 cards again and put 2 cards in the bottom of your library. So the formula is the number of times you mulligan. If you mulligan X times, you take X cards in your hand. You must put it on the bottom of your library. You don't get to scry on top. Once again, to smooth out draws, to smooth out games, makes for fewer miserable games. That's the London Mulligan. I have a lot of thoughts about this. Frank Laporte didn't like the London Mulligan. Saffron Olive didn't like the London Mulligan. So it was looking pretty clear that the London Mulligan might just be a failed test. But looking at these prices here, $10 for paper, $4 for tickets online, it might be a thing. What's really weird is, I still can't believe this, that the online prices from the announcement, if you look at the dates, February 21st, the online prices from February 21st is pretty steady. And it's actually only now spiked. Whereas you look at paper, and immediately, it's again, February 21st, immediately after February 21st, the prices go higher and higher and higher on paper. So people caught on in February that this was going to be a thing on paper, and they didn't catch on online. I think that's pretty comical. I have a lot of thoughts about London Mulligans. Basically what Frank Laporte and Saffron Olive both said was that it was too powerful. For several reasons. One is there's a deck in Vintage called Dredge, and the point of Dredge is to get your Bazaar of Baghdad's. And Bazaar of Baghdad's a land, it doesn't tap for mana, it taps, and you get to draw 2, discard 3. It's the entire point of the deck. They call it Manaless Dredge because the only lands in the deck are lands that don't tap for mana. It's 4 Bazaar of Baghdad's and 56 non-land cards. And I remember the day it was announced all over the internet, claims that it would beat 60 to 70% of the meta. People thought it was impossible. You can't beat 60 to 70% to all decks. Well, you can. It's just game 1, you beat 60 to 70% of all decks. Game 2 or 3, people will side in Graveyard Hate against Dredge, and you don't win 60 to 70% of your game 2s and 3s in Dredge. That's why Dredge isn't number 1 in the meta. If you make a mulligan even easier than Paris, even easier than Vancouver, easier than what Richard Garfield intended, then you're going to have a better chance of getting a Bazaar of Baghdad in your opening hand, which means the deck's even stronger, which means it unbalances the meta. So they both think that Vancouver Mulligans are probably best for Type 1, 1.5, or Vintage Legacy. And this London Mulligan is probably best for Type 2 or Draft, where your opening hand doesn't matter too much in order to win the game. Because there's no turn 1 wins in Type 2 or Standard. There's no turn 1 wins in Draft. And there's turn 1 wins in Legacy and in Vintage. And it's just really hard to do. Well, here's my take on it. I actually like the idea of the London Mulligan. And here's why. Back in the early days of Scry Magazine, there was a magazine that talked about Magic the Gathering, and it died because of the internet. It became bigger and bigger. People could just read articles on the internet. They didn't need magazines. Scry folded, but before they did, I remember an article in the early days of Scry. Richard Garfield designed Magic the Gathering to be at 20 life. And they asked Richard Garfield, why 20? Why not 21? And Richard Garfield just didn't have an answer. Basically, 20 was a round number. They tested the game at 20 life. The game worked. He shipped the game. Could the game work better at 21 life? Why don't we just give players a better chance? Why don't we make burn less annoying? Let's just start with 21 life. I mean, people are killing themselves. Turn 1 Lava Axe anyway with turn 1 fetch land, crack fetch land. Get a shock land, untapped. Tap it to play Thoughtseize. I take 5 damage turn 1. People are doing this to themselves. I hate it myself. But I mean, if people are doing it to themselves, why not just give players 21 life? The good news is Magic the Gathering works at 21 life. It works at 30 life. There's Two-Headed Giant at 30 life. It works at 40 life. I've played Two-Headed Giant at 40 life. on paper. So would Magic the Gathering still work with London Mulligans? Yes, it would. Is it too lenient? I don't care. What I really actually care is that Magic the Gathering lives as a format. When I was at Gen Con, I learned about this game called Magination. And what got people to play Magination is the very first thing they said is that this game doesn't have lands. Instead, they have these cubes of 27 dice, mini 6-sided die. And they put in these little glass cubes, and you take it out, and you put a little die on most of your monsters, sometimes 2 dice on your monsters. And you have these basically planeswalkers that have dice that gain 6 or 7 energy every single turn, and you use them and then transfer the dice on your planeswalkers per se on Magination, and you transfer them on your monsters. And these 27 dice, it was so cumbersome, but it actually kind of felt better than lands. And actually, I was trying out several card games at Gen Con. I even tried Full Metal Alchemist card game at Gen Con. This game doesn't have lands. Isn't it so interesting that Magic the Gathering, the first magical card game ever created, and Hearthstone says there's no lands. It seems like the number of lands in your opening hand just seems to be the constant problem, and it's a constant excuse for new card games to be created because it tries to subvert this god-awful problem that's in Magic the Gathering of how many lands are in your opening hand, and can you play a game of Magic the Gathering. Let me tell you that Full Metal Alchemist card game sucked because it was possible to do a turn 1 win. You could just look out and get the right cards. You could beat the mission. You would be assigned another mission. You get more cards, and guess what? Those cards were exactly what you needed to beat that mission. So you could go off. It was very unlikely, but you could beat the game in turn 1, and Magic the Gathering's land system was meant so you couldn't win the game on turn 1. It had a resource system to slow down the game, and with all of its foibles and follies, the land system is pretty good. Hearthstone's overpowered. They keep having to nerf cards. They nerfed Mana Worm. It's a 1/3 creature in Hearthstone. I knew it was too overpowered in Hearthstone. I played for 1 year. They nerfed Pirates. They keep having to nerf cards in Hearthstone because, well, 1 mana creatures are half the mana of 2 mana creatures. And I've heard people say if they would redo Magic the Gathering again, they would have cards that cost 1.5 mana. They would have Swords of Plowshares be 1.5 mana. They would have Brainstorm be 1.5 mana. Because the card is too overpowered at 1 mana, and it's too underpowered at 2 mana. People wouldn't play a 2 mana Brainstorm. And it's this problem that 2 is twice as much as 1. And there really isn't a good solution to that, but a fair solution is lands. So if they can make a system where there's a fair number of lands in your opening hand, I'm for it. Thanks for watching. Friends, check out humblebundle.com. You get hundreds of dollars of games for just $12 a month. It goes in your Steam account and it stays there forever. So, what I want you to do is I want you to join Humble Monthly with this code YM2B9L and support Walloficecream on his endeavors. And there will be more videos, I promise. We just need more than 0. Go for it. Do it.